I'm 28 years old and I've made a lot of financial mistakes. I know there are a lot of videos on YouTube about this kind of topic, and most of them are just about saving more and just not buying things on credit. I'm not going to be talking about these examples in today's video because I've actually never owned a credit card. Instead, I'm going to talk today about things that I would have done differently if I had the chance to go back to my early 20s and start again from scratch. A lot of people these days just don't really understand that much about money or how it works because it's not really something that's taught in school or at university. And most financial educational resources can only be found online or in books. And no one really knows where to start. I've realized that I've spent a lot of time in my late 20s really understanding the best way to save and invest your money. The problem with this though is that I wish I knew this information earlier. So in today's video, I want to share with you guys the biggest financial mistakes that I've made throughout my 20s. So let's get into today's video. Okay, so the first mistake that I made was just simply not working earlier. I'm not talking about getting a casual job during high school or university, but actually getting a proper job straight out of high school. Now in Australia, we have a huge mining industry that pays workers a lot of money. I remember going on a school excursion to a mining site and getting a brochure that listed tons of jobs that were available and their salaries. These jobs were paying at least six figures and didn't really require any degree or specialist qualifications. That means I could have just got a high-paying job straight out of high school. And the reason why these jobs pay so much is because they are fly-in, fly-out jobs, meaning that you fly to a mining site and you live and work there for about 1 to 2 weeks, and then fly back to your home city for another week off. So these companies and jobs therefore require a decent level of compensation in order to entice people to work in these sorts of jobs, particularly being away from their families for so long. Now, these sorts of opportunities don't really come around that often in your life, particularly as you get older and you're planning to have kids or start a family. If I managed to save at least 60 to 70% of my income during that time and invested that into a low-cost index fund with an average rate of return of about 10% per year, I would have almost 200K saved up today. Alternatively, that could have also been money put down for a house deposit and simply just rented it out whilst I was at university. I would have paid off about 250K over that 10-year period if I put it down on a property that was worth $1 million. So not only would have gotten a high-paying job straight out of high school, accelerated me financially, but it would have also given me more time to reflect and seriously consider what I was actually going to go and study at university. Now, the second mistake that I made was just simply not investing earlier. Now, I know this one sounds like a bit of a cliche, but I've actually lost a lot of money just by simply saving over the last 5 to 6 years and not actually investing it. Every year, the value of your savings decreases by 2 to 3% due to inflation. And whilst in some cases it is important to save, especially if you're after a house deposit, I've realized that if you just invest your money over that period of time, you are going to be financially better off in the long run. Now, this isn't financial advice, but if you did try to save for a house deposit, it would take you at least 3 to 5 years. And over time, the value of your savings will decrease in value due to inflation. Instead, I should have just invested my savings as early as possible into a low-cost index fund. That would have given me an average annual rate of return of 10% per year. The only scenario where you would be better off saving during this time would have been by timing the property market and buying 12 months ago when property valuations declined. But at that time, so many people were worried about their jobs and loan approvals were really tight. So it wouldn't have even have made sense. Property valuations just seem to keep increasing and you need every possible chance you can get to beat the other person at the auction. And the only way to really do this is by getting outstanding returns in the share market, because you're most likely going to be bidding against someone that has a similar amount of savings to you. And in this instance, you will be able to beat them if you have an extra 10, 20, or 30% in savings due to returns that you've made in the share market. Now, the third mistake that I want to talk about is not starting a side hustle sooner. And the reason why this is a big mistake is because starting a side hustle really expands your mindset in terms of the possibilities to actually becoming wealthy. The problem these days is that a lot of people think that as soon as they hit six figures, they're going to be okay, or that they're going to become instantly wealthy and they'll be able to save for a house deposit or invest in the stock market. But the reality is is that there's not really that much of a difference in a high tax country like Australia or the United States. Yes, it's great to aspire to earn 100, 150, 200 or $300,000, but in these sorts of countries, when you're paying 50 cents to the dollar on tax, the bottom line is actually not that much of an increase. Like if you compare someone who's earning 100K a year to someone who's earning 150K a year, once you take out retirement savings, tax, and the health insurance levy, the difference only comes out to about $28,000 a year. Now, if you're really frugal and you invest that difference over a very long period of time, then yes, you will be better off financially in the long run. But the reality is most people won't actually invest that difference and will instead spend more of that money as their lifestyle creep sinks in. So the difference in terms of just relying on a slightly higher wage, in my opinion, isn't really going to make much of a difference to your long-term financial security. To take an extreme example, you could look at someone who's earning $1 million a year. Even that person earning $1 million a year would struggle to become financially independent because after taxes, they're taking home $500,000 a year. That person would also likely be in their 50s or their 60s to be earning that kind of money. So the time period in which that money invested can grow is going to be very limited as well. They would probably also have private school fees, mortgage, and everything else they need to pay for. So it's still going to take that person at least 5 to 10 years for them to build up their wealth into a multi-million-dollar portfolio and become financially independent. So unless you are willing to ditch your friends and family and go and work in a low-tax country like Singapore or Dubai and grind it out there for the next 5 to 10 years, the only way that you can get ahead financially, in my opinion, is by starting a scalable business. Great thing about starting a scalable business is that you can start it as a simple side hustle and then just grow it from there. And the advantage of the internet nowadays is that there are so many opportunities. 20 or 30 years ago, if you wanted to produce media content, you would have had to have bought a really expensive film studio and then distribute it through large media organizations. But nowadays with the internet, you can just go out now and buy a camera and a microphone and put it on the internet for thousands or even millions of people to see. Now, the fourth mistake that I want to talk about is actually being too much of a cheapskate. Now, sometimes what I mean by this is actually being too cheap to go out and spend money that in turn is going to make you money. Now, I'm not saying you should just go out and buy a whole bunch of useless stuff or to stop being frugal, but it's important to not be tight and cheap to the point where you aren't even enjoying yourself or the process of saving. The problem with trying to save so much of your money and not enjoy the process is that you'll eventually start to burn out, or alternatively do something really stupid like making an emotional financial investment. Like, let's say you've worked really hard for a few years and you've managed to save up a bit of money, but you haven't really gotten anything major out of it. You don't want that to influence your emotional approach to money, because the last thing that you want to do is think about how hard you have worked for that money, but at the same time, not gotten anything out of it. Like, let's say, for example, that you've worked really hard and saved up $60,000. And you might think, well, I haven't got really anything out of this, so I'm just going to chuck all of that on Bitcoin because I want to become a millionaire now. That's a real recipe for a disaster. So I think it's important to treat yourself every time you hit a savings milestone, like going out and just buying an expensive watch. Is it something that you really need? And is it going to make a huge dent to your overall savings? Well, no, of course not. But what it will do is it will just serve as a reminder to keep going and also where you're up to. Now, the next mistake I want to talk about is being more vocal and assertive in your career, and also talking up the value of your work. Now, this one is more of an indirect financial consequence, but I think it's important to acknowledge that any job that you have always is going to involve a degree of showmanship in order to get promoted and earn more money. I used to think that the work that you do should just simply speak for itself. But as I develop and progress in my career, I've realized it's more of a game that you have to play in terms of developing and building positive political relationships with people at work who matter. People in your work are going to associate you with the major projects that you've worked on or you've led. It's not a heads down, bums up approach that's going to lead to a promotion. So work hard, but also make it very clear to your boss the value that your work is bringing to the organization. And a large part of that is developing strong and assertive communication skills so that you can talk up in meetings and show to people that you know what you're talking about. I've seen numerous examples where people get promoted, not necessarily because they produce better quality work, but because they're just simply more vocal. So it's important to not only work hard, but also play the game, because it will lead to a promotion and ultimately a pay rise. The sixth mistake I want to talk about is not spending so much time on social media. Again, this isn't a direct financial mistake that I've made in my 20s, but it is important to discuss because looking back over the last 10 to 15 years, I can safely say that I have just spent way too much time on social media. If you average it out to about 2 hours a day, which is a conservative estimate, then that's about 11,000 hours in total that I've spent in social media in my 20s. That's over a year just spent on social media alone. Had I actually done something productive with that time, like starting this YouTube channel earlier, or even just learning a new language, I would have achieved so much more. Social media is deliberately designed in such a way to give your brain a cheap dopamine rush every time that you use it. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it's a great tool if you want to build an online business or a brand presence, but it's certainly not doing you any good if you're just endlessly scrolling, especially at night when you're trying to get sleep, meaning you're less productive the following day. Now, my last point really just comes down to not having an intentional mindset and just delaying goals due to distractions and just seeking instant gratification. Most people, you can give them advice about changing careers or starting a side hustle or investing in the stock market in order to become wealthy. But then if you talk to them 1 to 2 years later, most people just haven't done it. And the excuse is always, oh, but I've just been too busy. Or something else just came up during the weekend and I couldn't work on it. And that's why I think the quarantine of 2020 was so interesting, because that busy excuse no longer applied. People were just sitting at home. There was no commute. There was no traffic, there was no running around on weekends. People were just sitting at home with all of this time to reflect on what they actually wanted to do. And for a lot of people, they use that time to start a side hustle that is now producing for them long-term wealth. You know, if you are going to be successful, you really have to put that goal and mindset over everything else. Dave Ramsey, who's a multi-millionaire, always says you have to live like no one else, so that you can later live and give like no one else. And when you look at these big time YouTubers that are making millions of dollars a year, like Graham Stephan or Andre Geek, they talk about in their videos putting in 50 hours a week into their YouTube channel on top of their full-time job for at least 1 to 2 years before things really took off for them. Most people just aren't willing to do that. Because when you think about it, the process of becoming rich is actually quite simple and straightforward. You just simply have to earn as much as possible, save as much money as possible, and then invest what you have left over. But a lot of people just don't do this because they are too tired to do any work on weeknights or on the weekends as well. So if you're never going to get over this idea of procrastination and saying to yourself, oh, but I'll just do it next weekend, then you're never going to get anywhere. So if you've made it this far in the video, I'd really like to hear what your thoughts and goals are for the rest of the year. You know, this year has already gone past so quickly. And so it's really important to think about where you're at in terms of your goals for 2021 and where you want to be in the next 5 to 6 months. Leave a comment below about what your goals are for the rest of the year and also which of these tips resonated with you and which are most important. Please leave a comment below and let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.